everyone, it's Kris from my girlfriend's quilt shop, and I am so excited to be able to share a series of short videos with you on how to make the adorable brand new mini quilts from Kimberbell. Now these are all done on the embroidery machine and they are 12 by 12 in size. They make the perfect item for your home decor. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and get started with the very first one, which is January. It is called Chillin with my Snowmies, and it just couldn't be any cuter. With that glitter applique and even the knit fabric on some of the stocking caps, this one is sure to be a crowd pleaser. Let's go ahead and begin by taking a little bit closer look at what we are about to embark on. As you see here, it's basically a 9 patch, right? We've got 3 squares up here, second row of 3 squares, third row of 3 squares. And it alternates in the background, so very little fabric is being used here. We've got our grays and our blues, right? And you're also going to take a close look at the background quilting. Isn't that darling? I love the little scarves on here, along with snowflakes and pebbles, all kinds of really cute background quilting designs on here. And those can be found at kimberbell.com. All right, so that's a separate purchase. And in today's video, I'm going to show you how to bring the background quilting and the applique design together as one. You'll notice that we have the glitter applique for those darling little snowmen. And we're even going to learn a little bit more about the fringe as we do the scarves, which is really a fun technique. All right, so that's an overview. Let's go ahead and begin. So the first thing you're going to want to do is print out your instructions, or you can simply view them on your computer. But I like to print mine out and put them in a binder. And it's going to tell us a few key points here on getting started. One of the things that they definitely recommend is that, if you do the preparation of the cut work first, you may want to put them in little small Ziploc bags, if you will, or some kind of pocket to be able to hold your pieces all together. That can be very helpful. But let's take a look at page 4. On page 4, you're going to see what swatch of fabric is used for each of the different blocks. And so, for example, you're going to see this darker blue, and it says 1 fat quarter, and it goes along with Snowmy 2, 4, 5, and 7, and the purpose of it is for the background. So it's very nice that it lays out for us what the purpose is and what we are going to be doing with each of those blocks. Very helpful. Another helpful component is that they put in fabric cutting diagrams. So let's go through that today and take a closer look at how that works. So in your kit, you will have received 4 different fabrics. This one's fabric 1, the gray's fabric 2, we have fabric 3 right here, and fabric 4 right there. All right, let's go ahead and begin cutting starting with fabric 1. It also tells us that it is a directional print. So it's really up to you to decide which direction you want it to go. But if I'm doing it according to the diagram, I will go ahead and take this fat quarter and fold it in half. I like to fold it in half personally. You could have it going all the way flat, but I find it a little bit easier to handle when I do that. You're going to also notice that there may be some wrinkles in your fabric. I highly suggest that you get rid of those with the iron first. So with my fat quarter folded in half, again, just to make it easier for me to manage with cutting, I'm going to take my ruler and first take a look at the first cut it wants me to make. If we take a closer look right here, it says 6.5 inches. That means 6.5 inches going across. I'm going to cut it all the way up, and then I will do what's called a subcut, which is where I turn the fabric and I cut an additional 6.5 inch square, 6.5 inch square, and 6.5 inch square according to this line. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that works. All right, so I'm on my cutting mat and I'm going to go to 6.5 inches right here and cut. And I'm just going to pull that aside while I do my second cut. All right, so I'm going to find a line that's easy for me to follow. And here is my second cut according to the diagram. Now this remaining piece, that's what we call stash, right? We always love to have some stash. Okay, I'm going to set this one aside and I'm going to go back to the first column that I did. And now I need to turn it the opposite way because I'm going to do what's called subcutting. So again, I'm subcutting at 6.5 inches square. So I'll go ahead and line this up on my mat. If I wanted to, I could do more than one layer at a time. But for purposes of this, I'm going to go ahead and just do it one layer at a time. Here's my first 6.5 inch square. And then I have another one. Six and a half. And then I have one more. Go right over here. I will also get to 6.5. Perfect. So I have my first three 6.5 inch squares right there. Now I need a fourth 6.5 inch square, and that's where my second cut comes into play. Remember, this was the second one I did. Again, I'm going to open it up, turn it around, and cut one 6.5 inch square. Again, I'm just following the diagrams found in your instructions. All right, so now I have four 6.5 inch squares. And if you guessed that this is stash, you would be correct, my friends. There we go. All right, we are done with fabric 1. Let's go ahead and move on to fabric 2, which is the gray. And take a look at this. This is the same exact cutting that we did with fabric 1. I'm going to go ahead and press out those wrinkles a little bit. And once again, we'll start from the left and move over to the right. Now, if it's not squared up on the left, you may have to, cut a little sliver off just to get a nice straight cut. But I will tell you, there's lots of leeway here. All right, you're going to end up cutting these to be smaller. So don't worry too much if it doesn't seem to, be absolutely exact. You're going to be still good to go. All right, this is going to be our stash. Right here, I'm going to set this one aside, pull this one over, and I'm going to go ahead. This time, I'm going to keep it as 2 layers. Again, this is just a little bit faster way to cut. And I do have a selvage right here, so I want to make sure and trim that away. All right, and then I'm going to do 6.5 inches. Again, remembering that I do have 2 layers right there. So I've got 1, 2. I need to get a third one, but that's a little too small. So I'm going to open this up and cut a third 6.5 inch square. Go. So I have all of my background pieces cut. All righty, let's see. The next thing it wants me to do, and I'm actually going to save this part for later because this white piece, which is also a fat quarter, happens to be the fabric that I would use for the back of my mini quilt. And so it does tell you to cut a 14 by 14 inch square, but that's the only thing that needs to be cut out of it. So I'm not even going to worry about the back of this quilt until at the very end. Okay. And the next thing it wants me to cut is this one. And this is going to be for my binding strips. They are 3 2.5 inch strips. We'll go ahead and just quickly cut that right now. 1, 2, Okay, there we go. So my binding strips are all ready to go. Okay, again, fold it in half. There we go. I'll set that aside for later. Okay, so what's after that? Well, all you have to do is follow the instructions right here for embellishment requirements. So it does have us cutting out 8 squares that are 3 inches by 4.5 of the white applique glitter. And you're going to see that right here. Okay. So this is such a fun piece of material to use. I'll do that here in just a minute. And then it has the black leather, the blue sweater knit fabric, yellow sweater knit fabric, and so forth. You've got the pom-poms. Those will come later on. And the black buttons, those come later on as well. Okay. So all of that is found in your embellishment kit. All right. So with this one, let me go ahead. In today's video, I'm only going to go through 2 blocks together because we actually repeat the same blocks over and over again 9 times. So for today, I'm just going to go ahead and cut again according to the diagram that you see right here. It says 4.5 inches, so that's 4.5 inches this way, and another 4.5 inches again according to the diagram. And then you go up 3 inches and up another 3 inches. Let's take a closer look at what's happening here. So 4.5, that puts me right about here. And I'm going to do another 4.5. Okay. And then I'm going to subcut. So remember, I turn them the opposite way. And I'm going to cut 3 inches. 3 and 3. And I would do the same thing on this one and the same on the next piece. But for today's video, we're just going to work on 2 cute little snowmen. All right, so with that all put together, let's take a look and see what's next. Tells us we want to have project batting, which is the most awesome project batting out there. Absolutely love this stuff. We use it a lot with Kimberbell projects. We also want to have on hand some fusible backing. This is going to be really important to add a little more structure to our background pieces, which I'll show you how to apply that here in just a minute. And then we need some light mesh cutaway stabilizer. This is what's going to go inside the hoop. So with that, let's go ahead and begin. And I'm actually not going to stitch out the first block that's found in the book. It's called the sentiment block. It's just this chillin' with my Snowmies. And it's a very, very basic block. You're going to do the background quilting behind it if you choose. And with some blue thread, stitch out the chilling with my Snowmies. Super straightforward, super easy. Let's go ahead and move on to the snowman block that we are going to do. And the first one is going to be, let's take a look. Which one is catching my eye, right? How about let's do Snowme 4. We'll do Snowme 4 today. And I am on page 14 for those of you following along. All right, so Snowme 4. Oh, one thing I almost forgot, but it tells me right here as a good reminder to iron the fusible backing to the wrong side of the background fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Here's my background fabric on this piece. This is my fusible backing. You'll notice that there's a slight sheen on the fusible backing, and that is the glue side. What I like to do is I just place my background piece over top and then just trim it right there. I'll turn this around and do the same thing on this side. And now it's ready to be pressed in place. Okay, let's go over to the ironing station and do just that. With fusible backing, you just want to press it on for, about 15 or so seconds. and it will just adhere right to the back. Again, what fusible backing does is it just adds a little more stability to the block, but you still have the nice soft drape of the block. It doesn't make it too stiff. And this is a great thing to use, especially if you're trying to avoid any puckering when you do your machine embroidery. I like to do it from the front, but I also like to turn it over and quickly do it on the back as well. Okay, that background piece has now been prepared and is ready to go into my project. I'm also going to prepare my hoop by placing light mesh cutaway into the 5x7 hoop. And the only thing we put in here is the light mesh cutaway. We don't have to add anything else to it for now. Make sure that hoop is nice and snug. And I'm actually going to take, let's see, I'm actually going to take a pair of scissors and just trim this up so that you can see it a little bit better as it stitches out. All righty. Okay, so let's go ahead and take another look at our instructions here. And I'm going to do option 1, which is block by block quilting. I just think it adds such a fun dimension to our blocks that I could never do on my own with a regular sewing machine. So this is how I'm going to teach this class, is by doing the block by block quilting. If you choose not to do block by block quilting, you can actually move on to option number 2, and that gives you a little bit different hooping instructions, the more traditional method. All right, so right here it gives us a design, and this is just a suggestion. It doesn't have to be this, but it is saying to use KDQ 254 loops 3 4x4 horizontal design. All right, well, let's head over to the machine now and pull that up. What I've done is I've already put it on a USB stick and inserted it into my machine. Let me go ahead and wake up the machine right now and find where that has been saved. Just right there. Okay, so KDQ 254, it's the 4x4 loops. I'm going to go ahead and touch that and hit set. So before we hit embroidery, we want to add the applique on top. And if you think about it, your background quilting is truly in the background. We don't want it to go over top of the applique, right? So that's what goes onto your machine first. Now we hit add, and I need to bring up my design again. So I'm going to go over here to the USB to find the design. And we'll go ahead and choose this one right there. And it comes up, but I need to hit set in order for it to go on top of the background quilting, right? And there you go. Ta-da! There's my snowman on top of the background quilting. Now I know that looks a little funky right now, right? In fact, if I can zoom in and you can see it a little bit closer here. But don't worry, the applique is truly on top of the background quilting. All right, so with all of that put together now, I am ready to go ahead and hit embroidery, and I'm ready to begin stitching. All right, so let's go ahead and take my 5x7 hoop. And I just simply place it right into the machine. There we go, and bring the little lever down. Now, let's take a look at our screen once more. Up here in the top right-hand corner, and every machine is a little bit different, but most machines will have a little preview window. And that's going to show us what step is stitching out first. So for example, on this one, it has a square. This is the placement line for my background quilting. All right, so I'll go ahead and put my foot down and begin stitching that out. All right, so you'll notice the line. I put it in dark thread so that you could see it a little bit better, but you can use any color thread you'd like. Now this is the placement line for where I'm going to place my batting. All right, so you just have to make sure that your batting is a little bit larger than the outline. You can pre-cut your batting squares if you wanted to, and if you weren't sure what size to pre-cut them, all you have to do is look at what the finished cut size is and just add a 1/2 inch. So for example, if this was a 4.5 by 4.5, I could pre-cut my batting to be 5 inches by 5 inches. That gives me a little wiggle room to cut away the edges. But if you're like me, you may have a lot of scraps lying around, right, from previous projects, which is what I have going on right now. I'm just going to go ahead. There's a little bit of waste there because I could have cut it down, but this piece would not be big enough for anything else. So I'm going to go ahead and use my batting scrap. As long as it goes over top of that line, you are golden. What it's doing right now is called the tack down stitch, and you'll notice that it goes over twice, making sure to keep everything in place. Okay, I'll remove the hoop from the machine very carefully and bring it over to my cutting table. And this is where I want to grab my awesome Kimberbell scissors right here, and I'm going to trim the excess batting away. When trimming, you just want to pull aside that excess fabric, and you want to try and get as close as you can to the batting, or to the stitch line, I should say, without cutting into it. Okay, so there we go. What's going to happen now is that this is going to go back into the machine, and it's going to do a placement outline just a 1/4 inch outside of the batting line. That's going to make sure that I know exactly where to place my background fabric. All right, so that's very important. Now, one of the things you're going to also notice when this stitches out, like I said, there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance. The reason for that is because now by doing the block by block method of quilting, you won't have any batting in your seam allowance, which is pretty awesome. All right, so let's take it back to the machine and slide that into the garage, close that garage door, and we'll put our foot down and begin. Okay, as long as my fabric goes outside that placement outline, I am good to go. So I'll go ahead and place that in there. And the next stitch is going to be the tack down stitch to hold this in place. Again, it doesn't matter what color thread you're using on this step. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the screen on your machine again. Remember how we have a little preview window up here? Well, if you take a closer look at this, can you tell what's about to stitch out? If you guessed the background quilting, you are right. Look how cute those loops are. And on this one, I definitely want it to show because I think it's really, really cute. So I'm actually going to be using a little bit lighter blue on here. And I'm going to switch out my thread colors. Now, this is when it's important to switch out your thread colors, right? This is going to show, so you want to make sure and use the thread color that you think will look best with your background. Now, sometimes I like to have the thread just like sink right into the fabric. And so if I wanted that to happen, if I just was looking more for texture rather than design, I would use maybe a navy blue thread. But I actually do want both the texture and the design on this one. So I chose a little bit of a contrasting thread so that you can actually see it a little bit better. All right, so let's go ahead and thread the needle. And this is when the magic happens. Foot down and start. All right, so the background quilting is all done. Let's take a closer look at it because it really is so cute and it's kind of subtle. I didn't use anything with too much of a contrast, but you can definitely see those loops. I think it looks really cute. So what's going to happen now is now I go into the regular part of the embroidery applique. So it's going to do a placement stitch for the snowman. Now, in order to see that a little bit better, I'm going to go ahead and switch my thread out to be white. All right, let's go ahead and start making the snowman. With the snowman outline stitched out, I'm now ready to add the glitter sheet. But there's one important thing I have to do before I do that, and that is I need to remove the plastic topping. All right, you definitely do not want to stitch with that plastic topping. Trust me, been there, done that before, and it's not a pretty sight. So go ahead and remove the plastic topping. In fact, you can set it aside because we can use this as a barrier between our iron and this in a few moments when we go to press this in place. So I'm just going to set that aside here. And look how beautiful that glitter is. And the best part is it doesn't get all over you, right? It just gives that great shimmer. So I'm going to treat this just as if it were fabric. I'm going to place it over top of the snowman outline. And if you want to, you can actually use some Kimberbell paper tape to just kind of hold it in place temporarily to make sure that it doesn't move on you. And place a little piece at the bottom and a little piece at the top. All right, so there we go. Now it's time to do the tack down stitch. All right, I'm going to go ahead and remove it from the machine and bring it over to my cutting station again. And this time I'm going to use the little snippers. I love these guys. This is one of my favorite tools when I'm doing embroidery. And again, I'm just going to very carefully but closely trim away the excess glitter from the snowman. And there we go. Easy peasy, right? All right, I'll go ahead and take that to the garbage. And one more thing I want to do before I put it back into the machine, and that is I want to take it to my ironing station and I'm going to press it for about 15 seconds with a warm iron. Now, it's important that you don't touch the iron directly to the glitter. It's going to cause you all kinds of havoc. So instead, use some kind of pressing cloth, whether it's a piece of fabric you could do, or a formal pressing cloth, or even this little glitter sheet. And I actually like to remove some of the tack on it. So I might actually just, do a little bit of this on my clothing just to, again, remove. I don't want it to be too sticky. I'll place it over top and then I'll put the iron on top of that. And then you want it to cool before you remove it. So it'll take just a few seconds. And then go ahead and peel that away. All right, so now your glitter applique is nice and permanently bonded to your project. All right, time to put it back into the machine. And with my white thread in place, I'm ready to do the decorative stitch that goes all the way around the outside of the snowman. So it's now time for the hat. So I'll go ahead and put my foot down and it's going to do this placement line for the hat. All right, easy enough. This is where I'm going to take my black leather piece and place it over top of the hat outline. Now, this next step is really important because whatever thread I choose is going to be the thread color that is shown. This is actually a raw edge applique. So if you want it to be in white thread, you certainly could have white thread. If you want it to match and be a black thread, you could certainly do that as well. So it's totally up to you. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch it out for black thread. If you felt like you needed to put a piece of tape to secure it, you could. I'm going to go ahead and put my foot down. I'm just going to kind of hold it in the corner for just a few seconds while it begins to stitch. And now that it's begun stitching, I'll remove my hand. All right, back here at my cutting mat, I'll go ahead and trim away the excess leather. All right, now that that is done, I need to do one more step before I add the hatband. And that is I'm going to take a small piece of water-soluble topping and just place it over top. I am going to use a little bit of paper tape right here just to hold it in place while it begins to stitch out. Okay, what this is going to do is just keep my thread stitches up above the leather rather than sinking too far into it. Now that I've added the water-soluble topping over top of the snowman, I can not only stitch out the headband on top of the hat, but I can also stitch out the little eyes and mouth on the snowman without those stitches sinking too far into the applique. And that's the beauty of using a water-soluble topping. It keeps those stitches up above. Now it's time to do the arms. Now in the sample found in the book, they actually use the color black thread. But I decided that the black was a little too close to the navy, so I decided to change it to brown, like brown sticks, right? So that's what I'm going to do. And again, your thread choice is entirely up to you. All right, now it's time for the hatband. Let's do it. Now it's time to put a little nose on our Snowmy. All right. His little face has all been put together, but he needs something to wear, right? And that's where the water-soluble thread comes in, my friends. If you've ever wondered how to make fringe, how in the world do we do this? Look at me. I'm just snipping these extra threads away because it's going to drive me crazy, right? I don't want to even wait till the end. I just want them out of the way. If you've ever wondered how to make fringe, this is how you do it. All right. So let's take a look at our instructions, okay, and follow along here with me. I am on page 15 now. Up at the very top, you're going to see that Kimberbell's so great. They put this in yellow. That means it's really, really, really important. So it says this: change the bobbin thread to a water-soluble thread or a visible color. Okay, what does that exactly mean? Let's take a look at water-soluble thread. Did you know there was such a thing? If you've done fringe before and you've done it with us, you know this is one of our favorite methods. This is called Vanish Extra by Superior Threads. There's lots of different ones out there on the market, but this basically, like it says, it vanishes. It disappears with water. Now, why would I want to put a water-soluble thread in the bobbin? Well, because the way this design has been digitized, the little fringe that comes out from the scarf, as shown here in this picture, you can see that the fringe is coming up and out of the fabric. And the way that's done is a special digitization method where there are some tack down stitches and long stitches. And all I know, I wish I knew the secret to the success, but I don't. All I know is I love doing it, is that water-soluble thread is going to become your best friend in this step. Now, what do you do if you don't have water-soluble thread? Just use a different thread color that will show up. So I'm going to do my scarf in green. That's going to go in my top thread. Okay, that's going through my needle. But the water-soluble is going to go in my bobbin. Now, make sure that when you wind this onto a bobbin, you mark it. My marking is starting to come off a little bit. I probably need to redo that. But the marking is there to tell me, Kris, this is water-soluble thread. Don't use it anywhere else except for a project like this. Because when we wash away the back, that's when the thread is going to pull up, which is really fascinating, and you'll see how that works as we go along here. All right, again, if you don't have water-soluble thread, just use a contrasting color. So if I were using green in my top, I might use red in my bobbin. It's not going to show, I just need the contrast so I know where to cut my threads. All right, so I'm going to change this over to water-soluble thread, and I'm going to stitch the scarf fringe as found in step number 10. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to set that one aside and place the new bobbin in here. Again, this is with water-soluble thread. And now I will load my hoop into the machine. All right, and I'm going to switch my thread color out to green. All right, so it's going to do the little fringe detail on the scarf, and it just does a few stitches, not very many. Now the next step is to stitch out the rest of the scarf. Remember, this is just the fringe. So I'm going to go ahead and keep my green thread up on top. Okay, that doesn't change, but don't forget, it's time to remove the bobbin from the machine that has the water-soluble thread, and we're going to replace it with the real stuff. All right, so very, very important. It's all highlighted in your instructions, and just promise me you're going to look at those instructions very carefully and say, yeah, I know what I have to do. I'm going to change out that bobbin thread, and trust me, you'll thank me later for that little reminder. All right, so let's go ahead and change that out, and I'm going to set it aside and now replace it with my regular thread and stitch out the remaining part of the scarf. And with that, my block is finished. Now you can see on the screen right here that there's one more line on the stitch out. However, it tells us in the instructions not to stitch out this line. That line was done for digitizing purposes only. So just make sure and not stitch it out. If you do, no big deal. Just go back and rip it out later. So not a problem, but we don't need to stitch it out. So I'm officially done with this block at the machine. But let's go back over to the cutting table and figure out what we need to do next. I'm going to place my hoop right here and just simply pop it out of the hoop. And now I'm going to remove my water-soluble topping. Okay, so just kind of pull up on it. It just tears away real nice and easily. And if there's any little bits or parts that are left, which it looks like that tore off really nice, but if there is, all you have to do is take maybe a little cotton swab or even the dab of your finger with water and just kind of rub over top of it, and it will just dissolve on its own. So pretty cool. All right, the other thing we need to do is now fringe this scarf, right? So how do we do that? Well, we're going to flip this around, and I know it's really hard to see, and this is one of the reasons why people love using the water-soluble thread, is because I can take a little bit of water and just dab that on there, and it's going to disappear. So let's go ahead and do that right now, and then I'll show you how to square up this block. Okay, I'm going to use just my little spray bottle with water. And just kind of rub that in a little bit. Just on those little edges where the water soluble was. Again, if you didn't use the water soluble, you had a different color thread, what you would do is you take your little scissors and you just trim right down the middle where those bobbin threads are. All right, so that essentially has disappeared. And now I can turn it back over top and start to pull out my threads. And I'm just going to take my little stiletto here. You could also use a seam ripper. Ah, look at that. So I'm just going to pull those up and look how cute that is. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. And see, the stitches don't come apart. Just the very edge of it does, the one end. So it comes up and frays on the ends. And that's how all of your snowman blocks are going to have that little fringe happening at the end of the scarf, which really adds a whole nother level of cuteness to this design, right? So that's how easy it is to do fringe. Wasn't that simple? So on page 15, you're going to see that it's time to now square up that block. And it tells us that we need to square it up to be 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches. How do you do that? Well, there's a few ways, but one of my favorite methods of doing it is with orange pop rulers. These are game changers. I absolutely love them, and it actually works really well when in use with conjunction of a rotating mat. Trust me on this one. But let's go ahead and take a look at what that exactly means. I can actually center that block right here where the snowman is. I can see that the snowman bottom is supposed to be at the bottom, and it tells me that in the instructions. In fact, let's take a closer look so you can see that it says line up. So that's where I'm going to line up, right? And then, so at that point, I can take my rotary cutter, and do you see how there's little extended corner channels here? That allows me to get my rotary cutter right in the center of that channel. And then do you see why a rotating mat is so helpful here? So just be very careful as you cut. All right, I could have also put a second layer of the orange pop rulers around if I wanted to have more surface room to hold on to. Okay, there we go. And let's see what happens. Ta-da! There's my block, and it is a perfect 4.5 by 4.5 inch square. Pretty cool, right? You'll also notice there's no batting in those 1/4 inch seam allowances, so it's ready to be added to the next block over. All right, so that's how easy it is to do one of these snowman blocks. And remember, there's 8 Snowmies total in this little quilt. The center block, of course, is just the same. This is Chilling with my Snowmies. So now let's go ahead, because that was so much fun, let's do another one, shall we? Let's do another one, this time with a gray background. You're going to see how adorable that background quilting is on it. And as I go along, we're going to go through this a little bit quicker this time. And as I am stitching along, I'd love for you to be thinking in your mind, okay, what's next? What's the next step going to be? And see if you can kind of beat me to it. All right? Sound good? Let's go ahead and do the second snowman block of this series, and we'll start right now.